long countdown.
30.
Even NASA doesn't do that.
Welcome everybody to the Bring Them Home webinar, annual Thursday night webinar with Rabbi Pinchas Winston. The primary goal of Bring Them Home is a new organization you may have heard of. We are here to provide Torah resources that explain and prove why Jews should consider Aliyah as a viable life option today more than ever. And we have a lot of useful links for you. We can connect you with many different Facebook groups that'll help you, services that will help you with logistical, bureaucratic, and steps along the way that you need for Aliyah. We are in constant dialogue with Geula Israel, both in Eretz Israel and in the Geula, regarding all of our efforts. Bring Them Home has been created by Josh Wander, and he's here with us tonight. And also, I help him out a lot, and my name is Yehuda Shamroth. I live in Ramat Beit Shemesh, and my project is the Miriam Project Geula Hour. We discuss on SoundCloud the end of days, which I believe we're living in, with many, many experts on the topic. And you can connect with SoundCloud.com, look for the Miriam Project Geula Hour to hear interesting topics of Geula end of days stuff. And without further ado, we're going to introduce Rabbi Pinchas Winston, who we all know week after week. And if you're new to us, you should know Rabbi Winston. Hails from Toronto, associated for many years with Asia Torah, Toronto and Jerusalem. He now lives in Tel Stone, Israel. He is the author of over 50 books on various topics that deal with current issues from a traditional Jewish perspective. He is also the author of a series of essays on the weekly Parsha that you can't live without. It's called Perceptions. You can read many other books on his site. You can go to his site 36.org. You can see right there on the screen how many books he's written, all 50 of them. THIRTYSIX, written out, 36 written out.org. You can tap into as many webinars, essays, and YouTube videos and programs which include topics such as, like I said, the Parsha Shavua, reincarnation, end of days, Geula Barachamim, Kabbalah, and many, many more. And you shouldn't miss his most current webinar, Rosh Hashanah, the highest of holidays. So without further ado, welcome Rabbi Pinchas Winston and Josh.
I just want to mention that we are a live show that is live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, and other platforms. Therefore, if there are any questions during this show, you're welcome to type them into the comments section and ask them live.
Take it away.
Okay. The Talmud actually very interesting has a couple stories that are very appropriate for this time of year for Rosh Hashanah, and there's a nuance in the story itself that I think is important to bring it out also as well, because that speaks a lot about the situation today and how things are evolving as we go into Rosh Hashanah. There's still a lot of question marks about how to go about praying on Rosh Hashanah, the shul situation, and just the whole atmosphere is one of more confusion, and it's not as simple and straightforward as we've enjoyed over the last who knows how many years. We've been very blessed, coming off a very, 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 very nice period of history where we were able to earn good livings, and we have nice houses for the most part, Baruch Hashem, and we're decent clothing and food, and and shuls. We have a lot of shuls, and we were able to learn Torah. Pretty much it's been ongoing for the last while. It just gets better and better and better. And all of a sudden, this year comes around, and we can't do the things that we normally do without thinking twice about. Going to shul is a big issue because of the coronavirus. Making simcha as a wedding used to be a tremendous affair. Lots of people and good food and enjoyable time to bring a lot of joy to the new chassan and kala, the bride and the groom, and of course a bris milah is a big mitzvah to attend if you can. And all of a sudden, we've been shut down to a large degree. And it's just been different. In some respects, I think some people were happy because cost of weddings came down dramatically for a lot of people because you can't have big weddings. But overall, the level of simcha has also been reduced dramatically. And there are restaurants that were opened up different places in the world providing wonderful kosher food. All of a sudden, a restaurant is just being a restaurant is a very tricky business because day to day you don't know how sales are going to be, and a lot of pressure that has been applied that, again, as I said before, we have taken for granted, not so much anymore. Even though a lot of people have not taken coronavirus as serious as perhaps they should have, or don't, or once did, but nevertheless, we've all been affected, and that's got to play into Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is Yom Adin. This is the day of judgment. The Gemara says very specifically, it's decided on Rosh Hashanah what type of living you're going to make in the upcoming year, what kind of blessings you're going to have for the most part. The only thing that's not decided, perhaps, is how much money you can spend on Shabbos. It's kind of an open account, and the Talmud Torah, mitzvahs like that, where it's not fixed on Rosh Hashanah, but for everything else, for the most part, it is fixed, and it's Yom Adin, the day of judgment. And even though there's 2 days, really one day, the first day is from the Torah, the second day is rabbinic in nature, although Kabbalistically, some of the Rosh Hashanah aspects do flow into the second day. There is certainly a connection that should be taken seriously, but the first day really is the Torah mitzvah, and this year it's on Shabbos, so we won't be blowing shofar, which is the Torah mitzvah, blowing shofar the second day, because the second day itself is rabbinic, so blowing shofar is also rabbinic, but nevertheless, it's an important thing to be able to hear and to participate in the mitzvah, and this is the day. This is like, exam day, so to speak. Yom Kippur, in a sense, allows us to kind of complete, hopefully, a process of tshuva that begins in advance of Rosh Hashanah, but certainly on Rosh Hashanah itself, where we're going to be inspired, hopefully. That's one of the reasons why this year is different, because part of that inspiration is being in shul with everybody and praying together. You can feel the atmosphere, the seriousness of the moment. It's kind of reduced somewhat if you're even able to get into a shul, because the numbers are restricted. And second of all, you've got these partitions between rows or columns, it's not the same as it was before, and we depend upon things like this to bring us to higher spiritual levels. So, what are we supposed to think? How are we supposed to look at all this? So I think that there's 3 stories that to focus on from the Gemara, the Talmud itself. The tractate is called the Avodah Zorah, which literally means idol worship, and the stories seem disconnected because there's a few pages in between them. There's certainly no flow from one story to the next story, but they have the same conclusion, more or less. And in fact, that nuance of difference is really part of what I like to focus on. But interesting enough, you have to really pay attention a lot of times. In the Talmud, it's very easy to miss some very subtle points that are crucial for a deeper understanding of Torah and mitzvahs and just living in this world. And I have to admit that I saw these Gemaras, these little sections in the Talmud, several times. One is on, there's 2 folio, it's a folio page, 2 sides. So one is on 10b, one is on 17a, so it's like 7 pages later. The next one's 1 page over on 18a, right? Yud Ches Amud Aleph, we call it in Hebrew. And if you don't see them in sequence, even if you see them in sequence, which is not so likely because not that many people learn that many pages at one time, and even lots of people who have not picked up on this one nuance, this one difference of in the conclusion itself. Let's start with the stories. So the first story is back in the time that Rome occupied Judea, Eretz Yisrael. They took it over in 63 BCE. That's when Pompey took over Yerushalayim. Goes back to the time of Hashmonaim, but that's officially the beginning of what we call Galus Edom, the Edom exile. There are 4 exiles predicted according to the Medrash. They're alluded to in the 2nd verse of Bereshis, and also the dream that Yaakov had of the ladder. And they're spoken about in many different places. This was called Galus Bavel, or the Babylonian exile. That's the first place the Jews were exiled after the first temple was destroyed. That was followed by Galus Madai, or the Median exile. Later on, which is right after the first one, and then later on came Galus Yavan, which was the Greek exile when Antiochus tried to impose a Hellenistic lifestyle on the Jewish people. We fought back eventually. Began 180 years earlier with Alexander, but there were more peaceful years until towards the end. And then finally Galus Edom, which began basically 25 years after the Hanukkah miracle, but 63 BCE is officially when Pompey conquered Yisrael, became a vassal state from that point onward, and more and more emperors were bothered by the Jews. They never really liked us that much. Certainly Edom, who comes from Esav, who was Yaakov's twin brother, and there's this spiritual negativity between the two of them going back to the actual people themselves. But the Romans, they imposed obedience. They let you do your own thing for the most part, as long as doing your own thing did not interfere with the collection of taxes and Roman lifestyle. So lots of people got along with the Romans for the most part, at least they tried, because they were able to acquiesce, and as long as they paid the tax. The taxes themselves could be burdensome and often were and cause revolt in different parts of Rome. It was an ongoing battle to keep stability in the Roman Empire because of all the tax money necessary to fund all the wars they were fighting. But the Jewish people, they pretty much kept to themselves, and they probably did try to pay the tax money more or less, as far as I know. But what happened was they taught Torah in public, and the Romans had outlawed that type of a thing and doing mitzvahs in public, bris milah. They were trying to snuff out the Jewish people, as many peoples had done before and after. And one Caesar, not the Caesar of Rome, but more of a governor of Palestine at that time, had decided that the Jews were like a cancer. So he called together his advisors, his generals, or whatever. He brought them together, and he said, "What do you do to a leg that has become, let's say, gangrene or something? What do? You have to cut the leg off, God forbid, but if that's what has to happen, to save the rest of the body." So he was implying that we have to destroy the Jewish people in order to save the Roman Empire, because they're like a sickness. They just don't blend in. They don't become part of the Roman Empire. They stay to themselves. They do their own thing, and they're very hard to rule. There was one Roman there whose name was Katia. I mean, just Katia, eventually becomes Katia ben Shalom, but it's called Katia, and the Gemara is because it got cut off in the end. And he said to this Caesar, apparently they knew Tanakh in those days, they knew Psukim, because the Gemara says he quotes a verse, and he brings the verse that seems to compare the Jewish people to the winds of the world, the four winds of the world. And he asked the question, why is it that the Jewish people are compared to the winds? Because without the winds, the world can't survive. You require the winds to keep the world working, to blow seeds around, to plant things, to bring the rain, all these things that the wind is a part of that allows life to go on. And just like the world cannot live without the wind, likewise, the world cannot live without the Jewish people, for whatever reason. You may not like them, but it's a reality. They have to be around. Second of all, he said that if you do wipe them out, you'll be known as a people that wipes out nations. And that's not going to bode well for the future of Rome. So this governor heard it. He said, you're making a lot of sense, and I hear what you're saying, and I guess we'll have to consider that. The only problem is the Romans had this very weird rule, and the rule was that you can dissent if you want to, and even make sense, and we may even follow your advice as policy, but once you have your chayiv misa, you have to be killed. It's almost like treason. It's like, on one hand, you're helping the state, you're giving good advice, but you contradicted the leader, and therefore you have to die in the process. Don't ask me. Doesn't make sense to me. Certainly not going to make people feel comfortable about giving their advice if it's going to run contrary to the thinking of the person in charge. But that's what the story says, what the Gemara says. So they take him out to be killed, to be burned to death. And on the way to be killed, they're taking him, right? And he runs across this Matronisa. This mashronisa is literally, it's a word, could be like an innkeeper, it could be just a woman along the way. I guess a non-Jewish, could be she was Jewish also, doesn't really say. But she turns to him, Katia ben Shalom, as he's being taken out to be killed, and she says to him, it's a pity that the ship has arrived at the harbor and has no money to pay the tax. Now you're thinking to yourself, was it the 9 o'clock news? What does that have to do with anything over here? He understood exactly what she meant. She was saying, you come to the point where you're almost like a Jew. You put your life on the line for the Jewish people, like a Jew's supposed to do, but you're not going to die a Jew because you never converted. So therefore, you won't get the reward that a Jew would get for dying, putting themselves up and sacrificing themselves, being Moser Nefesh for the sake of the Jewish people. So what does he do? It says immediately he performs bris milah on himself, right? Little surgery along the way to death. And then he jumps into the fire. But before he does, he gives his wealth over to Rabbi Kiva and his colleagues. And then he dies. He dies in the process. It's not the first time. A very famous story of a convert, Avraham ben Avraham, who the church, they captured and put into prison and tried to force him to return back to Christianity, and he died al Kiddush Hashem. We like happy endings. The happy endings mostly come later on in the world to come. And this world is a world for sacrifices. Hopefully the sacrifices are only about getting up in time for davening in the morning and eating kosher food and maybe going hungry if you can't find some in the meantime. And, like those type of sacrifices, we can cope with those. But sometimes we see historically, we came off a Holocaust or pogroms before that. Many, many Jews have died sanctifying the name of God. And this Katia ben Shalom did exactly that. And the Gemara says, after he died, a bas kol, which is basically a heavenly voice, comes out and says that Katia ben Shalom is muchan la'olam haba. He's going to the world to come. Apparently, his conversion was accepted from Shemaim, although it was kind of like last minute, and he's going to the world to come. He gets the full reward, the full rights as a Jew for what he did. Remarkable story. Sad ending in a sense, but really a happy ending because you die, in this world, it's a very temporary thing. To go to the world to come forever and get the reward for being self-sacrificing, that's eternal. But then there's a funny statement at the end of all of this. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the great Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he's the one who compiled the Mishnah. He pulled together all the great rabbis of his time because they recognized the persecution at the hands of the Romans. There was a time of quiet because Antoninus, who was friendly to the Jewish people, was in power and a friend of Rabbi Nasi. He realized it was an important time to actually record the oral law as much as possible because really it's not supposed to be recorded, but it was a Shas Chak situation. It was very, this is the time we had to do something that was very specific to save the veracity of the oral law. And he hears this story about Katia ben Shalom, and he says, Yesh mi shekoinu olamo b'shas achas. There are those who acquire his world, like a person acquires their world in a single moment. V'yesh mi shekoinu olamo achrei kama shanim. And there are people who acquire their world after many years. In other words, I may be born Jewish and I may be born religious, and I live my entire life as a religious Jew, and I, bar mitzvah and Torah as much as possible, and I put myself out. But the truth is, until my last moment of life, I don't know if I'm going to the world to come. But you'll say, but all those mitzvahs you did in your lifetime, yeah, that definitely makes it a lot easier. Makes it more logical that I might get there. But what if I'm not having the proper intention? What if God expects more from me? You're born into this, God, he says, this should be simple for you. Should be no question about that. But staying 5 minutes longer to learn a little bit more Torah or putting a little more energy into your davening, your prayer, how do I know? How do I know that it all adds up in the end? Or that I'm getting, the portion that I think I'm getting? I don't know. It's a famous story. not really a story, it's a joke that they tell of a rabbi who, who was a rabbi of a shul. He gave, sermons all the time and spent hours preparing them, and did the best he could as a rabbi, head of a congregation. And he died after 80, 90 years and went up to heaven. And he finds himself outside the big Beis Din Hagadol v'Haneira. This is the main heavenly court where they judge if a person's going to the world to come, what kind of portion they're going to get, or they have to go to Gehenna first. It's a Jewish version of purgatory. And he's sitting on the bench waiting his turn, and a bus driver, an Israeli bus driver, sits down next to him on the bench, and they start a conversation, talking to each other. And the bus driver is nervous. He's really scared now. He says, all my life I didn't really believe, I didn't know, but now I see it's all real, and I didn't really put myself into it, and I never checked it out, and I lived a secular life, and I don't know what's going to happen to me. I'm going to go in there, and they're probably going to kill me, put me into all kinds of fire. I don't know what to think. And the rabbi, it's probably right, but let me do my rabbinical thing, and I'll calm him down. It's okay. You'll see Hashem takes it into account. He's fair. Don't worry so much. And he's thinking to himself, and I got nothing to worry about because I'm I was a rabbi doing this all the time. And they call the bus driver in first, and he's there for all like 10 minutes. It's a joke, so you can I don't mean it's really apply up there, but for all it comes with a big smile on his face. And the rabbi is so pleased to see this man is so happy. Obviously, things went well. And he says, it's great. What happened? He says, they told me I'm going to the world to come. I don't even have to go through Gehenna so much. It's a little bit to fix a few things up, and I'm on my way. I cannot believe it. I would never thought it in a million years. So, wow, it's amazing. And he's thinking the entire time to himself, if he got that, imagine what I'm going to get. You can never assume these things. You can never assume too much. And he goes in there, and he's standing there, and no one's paying attention to him at all. And, just like, okay, maybe this is procedure. And after what seems like eternity, he finally clears his throat. And he said, no, we know you're here. Don't worry, just give us a few more minutes. We'll be right with you. And so he was in 10 minutes. Like, all right, 10 minutes have passed, and not even talking to me yet. So finally, they look at his file, the whole thing, right? And they say to him, there is some certainly merit-worthy things in here, but I think you probably have to spend a little bit more time in Gehenna than you might have thought, and you clear all that up, whatever it takes, 11 months it takes, and then you'll be on your way. So he's like shocked. He's absolutely shocked. He says, there must be a mistake. I'm sorry, this is heaven. We don't make mistakes like that here in heaven. He says, but the bus driver that just came in, he like 10 minutes to come, was he telling the truth? Oh yeah, for sure. And I was, I don't understand. This is very simple. He says every time you began your sermons, most people went to sleep, or they start looking at other things, and they weren't paying attention. So, but every time he drove his bus, people prayed. So you don't know what it is, as much as that's a joke. You just don't know what it is, what act you can do in the course of your life that might get you the world to come, or what might take it away, chas v'chalila. And it could be this time of life, it could be 20 years down the road, things that people could do. Yochanan Kohen Gadol, the Gemara says he served as the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, during the time of the Greek exile for 80 years. Some say he was 80 years old. Some say he actually served 80 years. He was a tzaddik. He did his job, and then he became a Hellenist and wiped it all away. Just like that. Elisha ben Abui Acher, also a story about him in the Gemara, the quintessential heretic who was a friend and colleague of Rabbi Akiva. You cannot underestimate the power of a moment. And Rebbe says, wow, like a whole life, I don't know, if I'm going, I'm not going, if I'm doing enough, I'm not doing enough, what kind of portion I'm going to get. And this man does a final act. His entire life, he lived as a Roman. And who knows what that life was. Probably wasn't religious, probably wasn't so godly. And all of a sudden, he gets this inspiration, and he does bris milah on himself, and he goes into the fire, and he gets himself the world to come. Wow, amazing, in a single moment. That's story number one. The second story, 7 pages later, right, is about somebody else. Elazar ben Dordaya. Elazar ben Dordaya was somebody, didn't take life seriously, didn't take the idea of sin seriously. The Gemara says he was involved in all kinds of stuff he should not have done, and he was on the way to do a terrible avera, the Gemara says, terrible sin. When something happened that just sort of woke him up, all of a sudden he came to the conclusion, came to this realization that even if he was going to do tshuva, it wouldn't be accepted because he's been such a bad boy. He's done things, so negatively against God, and he starts to panic. He just drops everything. He loses, any desire and interest whatsoever, even in the things that he can enjoy. And what did he do instead? He goes into some valley in Eretz Yisrael somewhere, sits between the hills, the mountains, and he turns to the sun and the moon and the stars, and he says, "Please, you have to pray for me, because I want to go to the world to come. I made a terrible mistake, and I've gone too far, and I don't know what to do. So please pray for me." And the sun and the moon and the stars, each in their own time, say, "We should pray for you," right? You might wonder how he's able to talk to them, but there's also a metaphor aspect to all of this. Ki'ilu, it's as if this was the case. And it has a conclusion that counts the most here. And they say, we can't pray for you, we get to pray for ourselves. And they bring a verse down from Tanakh or from Mishnah or someplace that says that they too will be renewed. They're also going to be destroyed and renewed at some point in the future. So pray for you, we got to pray for ourselves. So he says, "Oh, okay. Well, it turns to the hills. It says, hills, you have to pray for me and ask God to forgive me. I should be able to do tshuva, be accepted in the world to come." You pray for you? We can't pray for you. We can pray for ourselves. And they bring a verse because everyone knows that mountains learn Torah very well, and they know verses off by heart. So this mountain apparently also knew a verse and quoted it word for word in the original Hebrew, and said, "I have to pray for myself instead because that's my problem. It's my issue." And he gets a few different options, and each time he gets the same answer, being that they have to pray for themselves. So finally, Elazar ben Dordaya says, "I see that the matter depends upon me." And that's really what the Gemara is driving at. It depends upon you. The truth has to come from you. People can pray on your behalf and they can ask God on your behalf and all that, but at the end of the day, it's got to come from your heart, from your mind and your heart, that you realize that you made a mistake. In fact, the Gemara says, for example, that anybody who does tshuva from yira, from fear, they're afraid of punishment, so they can do the tshuva, but they still have to atone for their sins. They still have to fix up. They still need a kapara. There's two parts to tshuva, the tshuva process, what we call tshuva and kapara. Yom Kippur, kapara, there's tshuva and atonement. Tshuva is what we do. Kapara is what God gives. If God is pleased with our tshuva, he sees the sincerity, he sees we really want to make amends, so then he'll forgive us and wipe the slate clean. But there might still be some things that have to be fixed up and cleaned up, like some of the messes left over from the sins that we did. Some things you can't even fix up. Just, some sins have repercussions that just cannot be fixed, not in this world. But, says the Talmud, if a person does tshuva me'ahava, from love of God, their love of God and their love of Torah and their love of truth compels them, so that not only are they forgiven for their sins, but their sins become merits for them. So there's two questions. Number one is, how does that happen? How does that work? How do you turn a sin into a merit? And number two is why? What's the difference between yira, from fear, and love instead? Well, the second question, even though the Gemara says you always answer the first question first and the second question second, but in this case, the second question is easier to answer. And the answer, of course, is because when a person does tshuva from fear, they haven't really done tshuva. It's the punishment that makes them nervous. The fact that I might be punished for what I did wrong, that's compelling me. But if I could get away with it, right? A person goes to court and says, "Your Honor, I am so sorry for the fact that I drove through that red light at 2:00 in the morning. I won't do it again." Why not? Because I got caught. Because there's a policeman there, and he caught me. And I thought 2:00 in the morning. Who's that at 2:00 in the morning? But if I can get away with it, if I can cheat in my tax, and get away with it, it's an important point, by the way, especially today, because people underestimate the necessity of belief in God to promote honesty. People have all kinds of trust, and they're relying upon all kinds of professionals and government officials, but you have to ask the question, does this person believe in God? Because even for a person who's religious, it's the fear of punishment that often compels a person. They have this desire. They want to do the sin, or something like it. It's like they have this desire, but their fear of being caught prevents them from doing it. That mommy might catch me with my hand in the cookie jar. And, remember Adam Rishon? He got caught, right, with his hand in the cookie jar. So that fear. So I haven't changed. It's as if I'm saying that if there was a way to get away with it, I would do it. So God says, then what have I accomplished here? So therefore, okay, he did tshuva, fine. It's already a good step, and I'll forgive him. And maybe it could, but it's not going to become a merit for him because, in a sense, he still buys into the sin. But when a person does it from ahava, from love of Hashem, love of the truth, love of doing the right thing, they've changed. They buy into God's program. It's as if they're saying, oh, if I had felt this way back then, if I had known then what I know right now, I wouldn't have done that sin. At the time I was kind of ignorant, I was influenced, but now that I've developed this incredible love for God, I want to do what he wants. I love doing his will. So God says, well, now that we're on the same page, so why should I punish you for things that you've already done, but you already gave up on, and you realize the mistake, and it's almost as if retroactively you've eliminated them. But the question is, how does it happen? How does it work? So this is a somewhat Kabbalistic idea, but it's worth going over, especially going to Rosh Hashanah. When a person decides to use their car to perform a mitzvah, to deliver food to the needy, to drive someone, where they have to go because they missed the bus or something, use your car for the right reasons, for a good thing, for mitzvahs, for meaningful purposes. And you run out of gas, you go to the gas station and you fill up. What about the guy who wants to rob the bank? Isn't there like a white gas station for the people using their car in a more angelic way with clouds hanging over it, right? Or is there another, and a gas station down the street with horns sticking out, it's like that, and fire all over, not fire because it blow up, but a black gas station for the people on the way to do the wrong thing? No, it doesn't work that way. People fill up at the same gas station. It's all the same gasoline, the same gas station, just that they go off in different directions. So Kabbalah explains it works the same way with people. Whether a person is righteous or a person is evil, they use the same gasoline. And what is that gasoline? We call them in Hebrew Nitzotze Kedusha, holy sparks. You can't see them. They're not even quarks as small as they are, still belong to the physical world. But Nitzotze Kedusha are completely spiritual. That's inside everything. That's what gives the quark reality, that gives the the electron and the atom reality and the molecule and makes up the world in which we live. But Nitzotze is like an individual packaged aspect of God's light that is our soul, that is our bodies, that provides life and allows everything to exist and to function. And it's used by both people who do the right thing or who do the wrong thing. Either way. The only difference is, though, is when a person does a mitzvah, they use up the energy of the spark in a holy way. They free it from the world because now it's been expended. It arises, it goes up in the system to Shemaim, to heaven, and becomes a part of the person's world to come. The reward. That's why it says the reward of the mitzvah is a mitzvah, because when you do a mitzvah, you create that reality of the mitzvah, and that reality becomes your portion of what to come of ecstasy of divine light. But if a person does a sin, then he's taken that spark and he's profaned it. He's defiled it. It's like taking a white jacket and running through the mud. You have to clean it off. have to wash it off because it's not white anymore. You can't go someplace dressed in white while you're brown because of the mud. It has to be cleaned off. So when a person does tshuva mi'ahava, it's as if they pull off that dirt and the spark inside, which is holy in the first place, is now free of all that spiritual impurity and can go straight up to Shemaim and become a merit that it is. But the person who has sinned and does it from Yira, he hasn't changed his life. In a sense, there's still an attachment of the spiritual filth that he creates with the sin attached to the spark. And only after doing full tshuva and the kapara and maybe a little yasurim, suffering along the way, he can clean it up, and then it can become part of the person's portion later on. But not necessarily right away or at all. Depends upon how sincere the tshuva is of the person. And don't be mistaken, because tshuva has many levels. There's also another story, a very famous story of the great Sajja Gun, who lived around around 1,000 years ago, more or less. And he was once traveling around trying to inspire people to do tshuva. He was going from town to town to town. In those days, there wasn't internet, nothing close to that. I don't even know if there were cameras. No cameras at that time. So, paintings maybe, and for sure there were paintings, but it's very easy to know someone as great as such a good and not know what he looks like. So he came to one of his towns he was supposed to speak in, and it was a sellout. Place sold out, so to speak. And he went to an inn to get a room, and he comes to the innkeeper and he says, I need to get a room, do you have a room available? He says, I'm so sorry, the hotel's all booked up. This inn, it wasn't like a multi-floor hotel. This inn is all booked up. There's no room anywhere. And I don't know if you know it, but the great Sajja Gun is coming to town, and because of that, all kinds of people came from all over to hear him speak. And of course, being the humble person that he was, he didn't say, I'm him, He just said, oh, okay, well, do you have anything at all whatsoever that I could just use for one night? So the innkeeper had Rahmanas on him and said, I'll tell you what, there's like a closet here. It's not like a closet, it's like a room. It's like a small room where I keep all the utility stuff, and I can probably put a bed in there, and you can stay there for the night. I won't even charge you, anything close to the full price. He says, that's good enough for me. It's fine as long as I have a place to put my head down. So I gave him the room and all that, and he went to sleep that night. The next morning, he went out to speak and address the audience, and of course, the innkeeper went to hear Sajja Gun deliver his discourse, and he looks up and he sees the man to whom he gave that small little room that he was sharing with the brooms and the dustpan and all those other things. And he's like beside himself. He's like completely beside himself. He cannot believe he treated this great rabbi with such a lack of respect. And he couldn't even hear the whole drush, the whole discourse. It's like when you're so uptight, you're so worried, and you can't wait for it to finish. You can go over and apologize, and you miss everything that's being said. And finally, when it was over, this man kind of like makes his way through the crowd of people to get to the Sajja Gun, and he throws himself down at the Gun's feet, and he begins to cry like a child. And Sajja Gun's like, what's the matter? Please stand up. It's okay. Why are you crying? What's the problem? He said, I didn't know who you were. If I knew who you were, I would have given you my room, the best room in the entire place. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I gave you the closet. And Sajja Gun said, nothing. No, it's okay. I forgive you completely. There's nothing even to forgive. You did the best you could under the circumstances. And I was perfectly fine where I was. I had a bed. I slept. You did a kindness in the end to me. He says, no, it's not good enough. I should have given you the best room. And this man basically would be consoled. So, eventually Sajja Gun made it back to his town. And one night, as his Talmidim are learning in the base measures, they hear what sounds like a child crying out, in the snow somewhere. They can't understand what's crying. They go out to see, and they see their Rebbe, Sajja Gun, rolling around the snow. Rebbe, what's the matter? Are you okay? Why are you doing this strange thing? And he tells the whole story about the innkeeper, what happened. And he said, the truth is the innkeeper did exactly what was right and respectful, and I had no problems whatsoever. Look, when this man found out who I was, how it was not enough for him, how he wishes he could have done things differently. So he said, last year I did tshuva for something, but my knowledge of God was only here. This year, my knowledge of God is up here. And therefore, I have a much better appreciation of what the consequences, the impact of my sin was last year. For the part I did tshuva for already, that's over. That's finished. You're not supposed to dwell in the past, especially past sins. It brings you down. But for the part that I missed, I still have to do tshuva for that. I still, I'm constantly or I certainly should be constantly increasing my awareness of God. If a person's awareness of God has not changed since last year for the better, you got to work on it. That's what God's looking for. Rosh Hashanah. That's what He's looking for. That's what He wants to see. That you worked on your awareness of Him, and it's reflected in your life and how you live your life. So you can keep doing, tshuva. You can grow, and there's many different levels. And a sin can become a merit. If a person does mi'ava, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Nadaya, he cries to Hashem, and he cries to Hashem, and he cries to Hashem, and it says he actually dies in the process of crying and doing tshuva. Dies right there in the valley. And a bus call comes out, the same bus call apparently from before, comes out and says that Rabbi Eliezer ben Nadaya is going to the world to come, and Rebbe adds here something, right? He says Yesh mi shekara olamo achre kama shanim, v'yesh mi shekara olamo achre shas achas, b'shas achas, not achre b'shas achas, and not only that, they call him Rebbe, because when he started this whole thing, he was only Elazar ben Dudaya. When he died, he was Rebbe Elazar ben Dudaya. He got smicha, became a rabbi in the process, apparently, right? Not the way to do it. It's better to be tested and learn the Shulchan Aruch and all that, but that's what happened. And that's what Rebbe says. Same thing, right? He's crying again. Why? Because he sees, you can do it for many years and maybe even not. And here, in one moment, this person does it, and on top of all that, he gets smicha on the way out. Impressive. That's the second story. The third story, one page later, is talking about Rabbi Hanani ben Teradyon. And he was one of the 10 martyrs we mentioned on Tisha B'Av, and we mentioned on Yom Kippur in the Musaf. And his story is one of the few that's actually detailed in the Gemara. And it says that he was teaching teaching Torah in public, and he wasn't supposed to. The Romans forbid that. And he did it anyhow because he felt it was necessary, just like Rabbi Kiva as well, who also died for the same reason later on. And it says that they wrapped him. There's a Roman executioner, and they wrapped him in wet wool and then lit him on fire. And the reason for that was because the wet wool would slow down the burning to increase the suffering, because the Romans liked to make a show of things. They were a little sadistic, not a lot of sadistic. But also, it was important to them to let other people know, if you're going to take a chance and go against us, you should know we will pay you back many times over. Not just put you in jail, but we'll pay you back big time. And here's an example of this right now. So it says that his daughter was there at the time of the execution, as were his talmidim, his students as well. And of course, the executioner. And probably a bunch of Romans who paid good money to sit there and watch all the day place. And as this is going on, there's a dialogue taking place. And his daughter, who is a famous Bruria, the wife of Reb Meir, she says to her father, says, I can't stand seeing this happen. I can't stand seeing you like this and going through all of this. This is terrible, terrible, terrible. And he answers back very humbly and says, listen, if it was only me burning here, then, I could understand that maybe, it would, perhaps there'd be no divine revenge for what's going on right now. He says, but I've got the important part. They had wrapped him with the Sefer Torah too. The Sefer Torah he taught with, they wrapped him with that. He says, but the Sefer Torah itself is burning too. And the same God who will take vengeance on behalf of his Sefer Torah will also take vengeance on behalf of me. And then it says, his Talmidim, his students say to him and say, Rebbe, what do you see? What do you see? And he says, I see parchment burning, but osius, letters, the letters from the Torah flying up the Shemayim, meaning that my body burns, but my soul will go on. Just like the letters themselves are eternal, the parchment is temporary, it can be burned, but the letters are eternal. Likewise, will my soul go on, and this is a temporary thing. Remarkable, heroic story. He's not. You don't hear about the screaming and the pain and everything. He's having a conversation as if It's okay, everything's under control. I agree, it's not an ideal circumstance, 100%. I'm with you on that one. And quite frankly, I wish they'd have to do this, but if this is what has to be, so be it. And what a chance to sanctify the name of God, the greatest mitzvah of all. And okay, yeah, what are you going to do? Kacha, that's the way it is. Now, here's the funny part. The Roman executioner apparently is watching all this take place. And, he's a Roman executioner, probably not very high up on the totem pole in terms of IQs, and probably not the most sympathetic person in the world. Yeah, it's just a job, but what kind of job is it? And he's done this thing, and he's watching his victim burned to death slowly, which is torture. But all of a sudden, he says to Rabbi Pinchas, he says, Rebbe, calls him Rebbe, like he just became a student like that, on the spot. He says, Rebbe, if I remove, memory. First his Talmidim say to him, Rebbe, open your mouth so the fire can consume you, can die quicker. And he comes back and he says, I'm sorry. The one who took my soul, he'll take it at the appropriate time. And then the executioner comes in and says, if I remove the wet wool from you and allow you to burn quicker, will you take me to the world to come with you? And he says, yes, I will. Do you swear? And he says, yes, I will. And he does. And then at that point in time, he takes the wet wool off. He himself jumps into the fire with Rabbi Pinchas and dies in the process. And a bus call, of course, comes out again and says that both Rabbi Pinchas and the Roman executioner is muchan le olam haba. They're both going to the world to come. And of course, what follows? Rebbe. Here comes Rebbe again. Third story, one tractate. And he says the following thing. He says, Yesh mi shekoina olamo b'shas achas, v'yesh mi shekol olamo achrei kama shanim. And that's the last of these stories. In the course of the next, of 2,700 and some odd folio pages, there's no other story like this, at least with that, the Rebbe saying that. Rabbi Kiva dies tragically also al Kiddush Hashem, but Rebbe doesn't say this. He doesn't make this comment over here. And the Gemara, even though it often repeats itself, you can often find similar stories either referenced or repeated verbatim someplace else in the course of Shas. All of Talmud, these are not repeated anywhere. They're here. They're told we move on after that. So like I mentioned before, these stories were tragic stories, but in a sense, happy endings because they're going to the world to come, and it's very, very fascinating. And why the Gemara tells stories like this, and why they have conclusions like this, and what's Rebbe crying about, and why it even tells that Rebbe cried like this. What's the message behind it? And as I mentioned before, I must have seen these stories. I can't even tell you how many times. I'm embarrassed to say how many times I saw these stories, and I never noticed one very specific nuance of difference. I don't know if you picked it up from what I said. If you did, congratulations. But you got to hear all three stories at one time. And it's like this. If you look at the first time Rebbe cries, he says, Yesh mi shekona olamu b'shas achas. That comes first. There are people who acquire their life in a single moment, and there are people who acquire their world, or at least the world to come, after many years. And the third story is matches the first story too. Yesh mi shekona olamu b'shas achas, yesh mi shekona kama shanim. There's a difference in the second story, the middle story. And the middle story says just the opposite. Yesh mi shekona olamu achrei kama shanim, v'yesh mi shekona olamu b'shas achas. The question is that accidental or is that deliberate? So first of all, no such thing as accidental in the Gemara. You learn halacha, you learn law out by what was said and by what was not said and by how it was said and the arrangement of the section. And why is it next to this one over here? It was written with Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration. These people weren't prophets, but they were on a very high level that they could do phenomenal miracles, which we spoke about previously. I mean, this was the generation of people who could create animals at will to feed themselves, if necessary, could turn rags into challahs in an oven, if necessary, using Kabbalah. They could do this. It's a remarkable generation. And if they do something like this, it's because they're teaching you something, and for the person who pays attention, who picks it up. So, the first thing to do then, once you see this, because this is not what I did in the beginning, until later on, until I noticed this difference, right, is go back and look at the stories. And you see there's a difference from one story to the next story. In the first story, we're talking about somebody who was a convert to Judaism. He was not a Jew to begin with. He was a Roman. He got thrown into a situation because of his advice. And on the way, he was able to convert. And in doing that, become part of the Jewish people, get the reward as a Jew. And he acquired his world b'shas achas. Not after many years. At that moment, that Matronisa says what she says, and he gets the message, and it's obviously divine providence, because you're not going to find someone making statements like that at that time, in that place, at the right moment. Obviously, God was telling him, do it. Like, make that commitment. And if you do, you'll finish the process, and you'll go through what to come. The third story, when Rebbe cries, he's not talking about Rebbe Chananim and Terajian. When he says, Yesh B'Shas Achas, in one moment, you could say, well, maybe he is. Why? Because maybe this is the moment. Maybe all of his life he wasn't serving God well enough. Maybe he didn't have a portion of what to come. But the Gemara answers that question in advance. That's like so beautiful, because there's such a phenomenal pleasure and excitement from being able to show connections, in Torah, specifically in the Gemara, between things that previously did not seem so, connected necessarily, until you think about it. And you really, that is really connected after all. Because the previous page, right before we get to the execution of Rabbi Chanan ben Terajian, the previous page, it talks about him as well, about how actually it's the same page. It's back to the first page, 2 pages it covers. And he's talking to his Rebbe, who's about to die shortly, and after which the Romans take him to be executed. So his Rebbe says to him, he says, I hear you've been teaching Torah in public. God has allowed the Romans to conquer us and to destroy his temple and his holy sanctuary, which means that as bad and as evil as they are, they carry the day. And you're teaching Torah in public? So he says, that's what we Jews are supposed to do, isn't it? But he actually asks, he says, just tell me, do I have a portion of the world to come? He actually asked this right to his Rebbe, do I have a portion of the world to come? And he says, well, tell me, have you done anything noteworthy that you should earn the world to come? And we're all going, what? He's teaching Torah in public. We just said that. We just addressed the issue. He's sacrificing himself. He's putting himself on the line for the future of the Jewish people. And you're asking, has he done anything noteworthy? So we're all expecting, Rabbi, you yourself just said it. It doesn't say that. He said, well, once upon a time, I was out there collecting money for tzedakah for Purim, for Matanas Yedim, to help the poor on Purim. And accidentally, my money got mixed up with the money that I collected. I didn't know how much or whose or what. So I did? I took all the money, all of it, and gave it all away. My money too, mixed together and signed. Okay, it's nice mitzvah, but compared to teaching Torah in public and the cost of your life, okay, everyone loses money at some point in time, but you can get that money back. You get your life back. Doesn't how's that? Yeah. And then his Rebbe comes back and says, "Oh, if that is the case, then my portion should only be as big and as good as yours. Now, you're going to the world to come, for sure. And you got a great portion. Why? Because you gave your money to the poor. Teaching Torah, the risk of life, your death, doesn't make sense. So I once heard a shir by Rabbi Yitzchak Berkowitz to explain this point. And he said that the answer to this question was basically this, that he said that anybody can rise to the occasion when it gets difficult. There are lots of people who all of a sudden become heroic. Lots of people don't. But some people who become heroic, they sacrifice themselves for God because the moment calls for it. They rise to the occasion. Pressure will do that to people. But what were you like all of your life? What were you doing in the quiet moments when no one was watching and you could easily get away with it and it wouldn't cost you your life? Were you as much of a zealot then as you are now? Because if you weren't, then instead of being sacrificing for Torah, you're committing suicide. But if you can tell me that all of your life you've been like this, then your teaching Torah in public is not only not suicide, it's one of the greatest missions you can possibly do, and you have a phenomenal portion in the world to come, and I'm envious of you in that respect. And he answers the question with this little story, and he's, I see by the way you dealt with that tzedakah problem that you are a full-fledged, red-blooded kanoi, zealot on behalf of God, and therefore your teaching Torah in public is in fact a phenomenal mitzvah, and you have a great portion of it to come. So we know he's going to the world to come. His life has already been that way. So that answers the question on the next page. When Rebbe says what he says, he's not talking about Rabbi Chanan ben Taraji because he acquired his world to come over many years, and it happens to be going under a blaze of glory at the same time. So he's talking about the Roman again, who becomes a convert at the last second. And that's why he mentions B'shas Achas first, because he could only do it. He wasn't obligated in mitzvahs until now. His entire life, he was a Roman. He was a secular. He was a Gentile. He didn't have to do the Torah, live by Torah. So he could only acquired B'shas Achas. Had he lived his life after that, then he could also have to come Moshe. But why? But the Darya, it mentions the other way around first, because we see the power of doing tshuva mi'ahava from this. We're being told that even though he lived a life of sinning, you can't do this and then say, let me have my cake and eat it too. That doesn't work that way because we have a different halacha. It says you can't do a sin on the condition to do tshuva. It won't work. It has to be that you weren't thinking like that. You did the sin, whatever, for whatever reason, and now you're doing sincere tshuva, fine, but not the other way around. So what happens? So he does tshuva, not miyira. That's the way it starts off. He's afraid he won't be accepted. But over the course of time, he does tshuva mi'ahava, with love of God. And all of a sudden, not only does he get his tshuva, get his world, b'shas achas, but even the kama shanim he lived, all get turned around and become merits. Powerful. And not just that, says Rebbe, but he's called Rebbe because he's teaching us all something. His death is a lesson about life. Meaning what? Life comes down to moments, right? Literally one moment can make or break an entire Rosh Hashanah, an entire year. It happens all the time. It can happen in the business world, can happen in relationships. One moment, one thing can change it all. But one thing is for certain. The person uses that moment to come closer to God, to develop the love of God, to express that love. You come into Rosh Hashanah and you burst into a moment of Ahavas Hashem, you could fix up way more than you could ever imagine. So we should merit to reach such levels, God willing. We should know what that kind of love of God means. And for those who are interested, I have a book called The Love of God. You can help you get a greater perspective on this. But if we able to get that point, we have 1 week left, God willing, to get to Rosh Hashanah. In that 1 week, you work on your love of God and you develop it, and you really, it takes time. You just can't fall into it. As we said before, love takes appreciation, and that appreciation takes knowledge to build it up. But if you get there in Rosh Hashanah and at least show your desire to love God tremendously in a single moment, you can turn everything around for the rest of your life. Shana Tova, Kasiva, V'chasima Tova, and Shabbat Shalom.
Rabbi, do you have time for a quick question?
Yeah.
Or two.
Sure.
All right, first of all, Ruvain Aschenberg has a question. Ruvain asks, how can one approach and get closer to Hashem when over and over we do the same sins over and over, and we really wanted to have a better year, but we didn't manage to do that? Like, well, how do we approach this year when we feel like we haven't really measured up?
Well, I mean, really the answers and the question is, so the very fact that a person asked this question means they don't want to do that Avera over and over again. They really don't. I mean, who doesn't show up on Yom Kippur and go to the vidui and say, I cannot believe I'm doing vidui for that same sin again? Repeat it. Habits is hard to break, but the starting point has to be you want to break that habit. You want to get out of that and then the technical part after that. My Rosh Hashiva, Rav Noach Weinberg, used to always say, program or pogrom. If you don't have a program to change the Jewish people, God forbid, and things go astray, and it can lead to a bad situation. So I took it to be an all-around expression. You can use it in life as well. You need a program. You can't just expect yourself to change because you want to. Stage one, realize you have to love God. Love God as much as you possibly can, and that will inspire the change. But then you have to have a program. What is it that leads to that sin, and what are the concrete steps I can take to make sure that by next year I don't do the same thing.
Okay, thank you. And Batya Machalis asks, well, she doesn't ask a question. She just says, I want to thank the Rav for teaching us every single week. She really enjoys your shirim, as we all do. Get so much from it, Rabbi. That one statement that you made about, just want to clarify for myself, you say some people acquire their lives in a single moment. I get that whole thing and the whole story, and it's just so meaningful.
Not their lives, their portion of the world to come. Olamo.
Their portion of the world to come.
Yeah.
So you said some people need a lifetime. So is this according to Hashem's will also, or do we have some say in this at all? I mean, how does it pan out there?
The say that we have is how we approach our life. How we approach God, the Torah mitzvahs. Do we the greatest honor a person can have in life is to be promoted to God's executive committee, to become a partner with Him in the fulfillment of the purpose of creation. He offers that to everybody. He gave us a Torah, and you don't have to necessarily specifically know how you can plug into this thing, but He gave us a Torah specifically because to say, well, here's the format. If you follow this format, now I'm providing you with the parameters of the mitzvah. You provide the heart.
Okay.
And that's the greatest input that we could possibly give. That's the choice that we make every time we step into Shemona Esrei, every time we buy kosher, every time we keep Shabbos. That's the choice. Now, how am I going to approach this? Am I going to increase it holiness? Am I just going to treat it like a habitual thing I have to do as an obligation because I happen to have been born to from that? That's the choice that a person gets to make every single moment all day long, and that's what free will is for.
Thank you, Rabbi, and Shana Tova to you and to your beautiful family. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I just want to encourage everyone to go on to Israel Torah by YouTube, youtube.com/Israel Torah. There we have all these live webinars recorded, and you can go and you can revisit them as well as share them with your friends. Thank you, and Shana Tova.
Thank you, everyone. Shana Tova.